Okay. The passage of Scripture from Mark's Gospel today begins in a place that we often ignore. I don't know how many times I've read this story, and it didn't stand out to me in the way that it stood out this time. The story begins with Jesus saying to the disciples, "Let us go to the other side. Let us go to the other side of this lake. Let us go to the other side." And so the disciples join Jesus as they gather into this ship, or this probably a small boat. Scripture says there were other boats along with them too, so there were several small ships going across the lake. That lake often has storms on it because it's trapped between the cliffs that go around from each side, and so the air patterns often come across those waters and create pretty high waves. It's that phrase, "let us go to the other side." In Mark's Gospel, Jesus is beginning to teach the disciples that the gospel is not open just for the people that are just like themselves, the ordinary Jewish person. If you look at the disciples and you look at who they are, not everyone comes from the same tradition. And Jesus is saying we must open up and see things differently. And those who are on the other side are the places that often we must encounter. Going to the other side. The other side can represent those places that we are fearful of. And we're often fearful of those things we don't know. Or we're often fearful of those things that have happened to us in the past that we're scared is going to happen to us again. Or we have those things that surround us that we really don't want to be a part of our lives. And so the ship itself can represent becoming a part of the journey of the Christian faith. And on this journey, as we move from one place to another in our lives, God opens to us many new adventures. Sometimes those places in our own personal journey are not places that we really want to go or we were expecting to go. Fear also can come into our lives when we are looking forward to something. We often say, "Wow, I'm looking forward to that," with fear and trepidation. We're looking forward to it, but we're not quite sure what it is going to encompass. It's kind of the time when we're going to have a new child in our family. We look forward to it, but we're not quite sure what all that's going to bring. Or a marriage, or a divorce, or a new journey, or graduation, or retirement. Any of those experiences in life can be greeted with trepidation and fearfulness because it's outside of our vision. It's on the other side of where we're currently standing. As we look at the congregation and moving forward into the future, and you've spent time in the Sunday school classes today talking about the vision collages and what we have seen of the themes that are emerging, there is a great hopefulness that emerges out of these collages. And yet there is that little bit of trepidation and fear about not knowing what is ahead. But I think as we've had discussions with small groups of people, the thing that is coming alive for us out of this is God is with us. And yes, we've experienced some storm, and we've experienced things in which have given us some fears, but in the midst of that, God is with us and is going to lead us into the future. When this storm comes up as they're out on this lake, and they're so fearful and they don't know what is going to happen, apparently the water was coming up over the tops of the side of the ship, and they were worried that they were going to be capsized or sink. And so as they're journeying along, Jesus is down below. He's just taking a nap. He's restful and peaceful in the midst of the people. And so they wake him up. Teacher, don't you care that we perish? Don't you care that this is happening to us? Don't you care? Isn't that what we do sometimes when life comes to us and we are afraid and it's a storm that's all around us? We can't sense why Jesus isn't alive and right under the face of us, and we say, don't you care? Where are you? There, the disciples wake Jesus up. And Jesus comes back to them and says, really? And he turns and he calms the waters around him. And he looks at them as if to say, really? You can't trust that I am here in the midst to move you through this storm? I've never been on a ship that was in the midst of taking on that kind of water. I have been on a paddle boat when we got a leak and we couldn't bail it out fast enough. And that was scary, out on the middle of the lake, and somebody had to come with another boat and rescue us and carry that boat along. It was a scary feeling. Were we going to be out in the middle of this 450-foot deep lake trying to swim from there to shore? It does give us that sort of panic feeling. But Jesus is here saying, come. I'm going to take you from here to the other side. And even though you don't know exactly what's there, I will be with you. And that which you encounter and those whom you encounter, they may be greatly different from you. But my love and my grace, it's big. It's huge. It encompasses everyone. An old movie called Places in the Heart was set in 1935 in Waxahachie, Texas. I spent a little time in Texas where you can pull it into that drawl. In that period of time, in the middle of the Depression, it was also a very segregated period of history. One morning, one of the couples that the scene is about, Edna is her name, she gets up, they have breakfast, she sends off her husband, who's the sheriff, off into the day, and it isn't very long before she is greeted by others who have shot her husband accidentally. Here she is, a widow now, with 2 young children, in the middle of the Depression, trying to figure out how she's going to make it. It is a storm that has come into her life, and she doesn't want to go to that other side of life. But she's smack dab up to the shoreline. And there she begins to wonder how she was going to be able to support those 2 young children, and she doesn't want to lose the farm. She has a conversation with the banker, who is all too eager to take her land from her. And yet she struggles and tries to figure out how in the world she can make it. While she's struggling and trying to figure this out, a gentleman arrives at her farm and asks to do some handiwork and some things around the farm. His name is Moses. I don't think that name was probably picked by accident. That sense in which the one whom the Old Testament talks about, the Moses who delivers the children of Israel to the other side of the sea, to a wilderness they weren't perhaps ready for. Moses is a black man who struggles but has a great deal of skills in farming, and he offers to help her, and she's reluctant to take his help. And so he leaves, taking some of her silverware with her. They find him, pick him up, bring him back, and in that moment she says to them, "He's my hired hand," and she extends grace. And Mose, as they call him, is able to help her to figure out how to raise the cotton. And she's never worked in a field before. And they do the best they can, and the banker comes to her with when the note is going to be due, and she knows that even if the crop comes in at the best it can absolutely be, she's not going to make that payment and be able to pay the note. And then she learns that the first person who comes in from the harvesting of the cotton bale and brings the very first bale to the elevator or the area where they're bringing in the cotton, brings that very first bale, there's $100 reward for that. She calculates it out that if she could do that, that would be enough to be able to get that payment and note paid. They work extremely hard, and she is the first in line that day with a wagon load of cotton. And Moses is sitting beside her, very carefully coaching her as to what to say so that they don't cheat her. And she's given the $100, which, by the way, I did look up and calculate out, would be $1,800 today. So $100 would have brought a lot in 1935. But that evening, the KKK pays a visit to the farm, and they brutally beat Mose. She's also taken in a boarder who is blind, but helps in many other ways. And Will, although he's blind, has a very extremely keen sense of hearing. And as he listens to the men who are beating up Mose, he begins to call their names out one at a time. And he recognizes all of them by their voices. And they leave. Mose knows now that he will have to leave in order to make things safe for her. But in the midst of all of this, including a tornado that they are able to survive, they find a way. Edna finds a way to get through the storm to the other side that she wasn't anticipating ever to have to be. And the movie ends in one of the greatest scenes of all. They're in a church, and they're taking communion, and they're passing the trays in the pews one to another. And as they pass the pews, the communion trays, you see They're not passing them just to the ones who are alive and in the midst of that worship service. They're passing them to the deceased who have gone before, to the people who have offered to them a great deal of strength, to the people who have offered pain. And all together, they are in this room, this church, receiving the grace of communion. What hope, what love, what grace. God is offering to us to calm the storm, to bring us to the other side, that others may become a part of this community of faith. And however we struggle through that, it shall be a glorious time when together we share the good news and the grace of God's communion love. Places in the heart.